What happens when you combine the fog of war with a leadership terrified of defeat? I'll tell you what happens. Billions of people fall under Dominion occupation. Greetings, loyal members, and welcome to the Dominion War. Last month saw the beginning of the war, and the Dominion retook Deep Space Nine. They then attempted to carry out a series of encirclements to trap the Federation and Klingon fleets, but they failed. Starfleet saw it coming and performed a tactical withdrawal, though this was incredibly demoralizing. The Dominion advances will continue, and this month they will advance into Tantalus, taking Cetacean Prime on the way, the first homeworld to fall, as well as Tigaria. Starfleet actually believes that this is part of another grand encirclement, and they withdraw as a result, surrendering numerous systems and actually largely disengaging from the Dominion fleets. This is not actually the Dominion plan whatsoever. The true Dominion objectives at this point are less the destruction of Federation fleets, since they've really made huge advances into Federation territory anyway. Their goal now is to outflank Earth, and this will mean when they come to invading Earth in full, they'll be attacking on multiple sides. They're also attempting to split the Klingon fleets by taking Tigaria, moving towards the Antares Maelstrom, and really drive a wedge between those two fleets, and preventing them really from coordinating effectively, and the movement of supplies. This would also threaten General Martok's Klingon expeditionary fleet that is up more towards the central front. And they also are looking at seizing Federation infrastructure in the form of shipyards. It's worth remembering that the Dominion actually still don't have the numbers they want for this war, and would really quite like to seize more infrastructure, as well as denying it from the enemy, because they know that the Federation do have a strength in production. So these are actually what are motivating these Dominion actions, but the misreading of these actions by Starfleet Command is what really leads to them issuing a further tactical withdrawal, and they actually disengage along a wide front and leave a big gap for the Dominion to enter, and surrender a lot of systems needlessly, and they will fall under Dominion occupation. Now I'll come to that later. As for the Klingons, Martok's expeditionary fleet is now at Lysaria, and is at risk of being cut off from the rest of the Empire. Meanwhile, you have most of the two other Klingon fleets at Tanuga and Donula, and they're actually looking at forming a new front that will begin to emerge along the southern half, near the Antares Maelstrom, approximate to Klingon territory. As well as that, new Klingon fleets are being mustered at Karag and Nomat. Now, the Federation are mustering reserves, and I've covered this in the Battle of Tyra, with the 3 reserve fleets that are being mustered, and that's actually spread across the Federation. The Federation are much faster at mustering their reserves. It's worth remembering the Klingons just came out of a long and attritional war with the Cardassians, and so a lot of units have seen a diminishment in their strength. And then add to that the fact that the Klingon infrastructure is not as robust and modern as the Federation. It takes them longer to muster their reserve fleets, even though they will go on to create numerous fleets, but they are much slower starting up, and that's partially what the Dominion are banking on. They know that the Klingons are going to take longer, so if they can drive a wedge between the Federation and the Klingons in and around the Antares Maelstrom, they can actually do a very good job of fighting their enemies piecemeal and destroying them one by one, rather than having them push on a unified front. And that covers the Klingon actions. Now, I mentioned Dominion occupation and how numerous systems would be subjected to this, but I was being actually somewhat hyperbolic. While major systems like Cetacean Prime would see occupation, the majority of systems that have been taken by the majority of Federation territory that was taken by the Dominion wasn't properly occupied. Bear in mind the Dominion don't have huge amounts of numbers, and need all their numbers to continue their war of movement and motion, and continue their numbers advantage on the front lines. So they really don't have much in the way of occupation forces, though there are some swimming around, including a lot of Cardassian assault divisions that are making their way through, but they're really busy with the Maxia Actium Wall and other major fortifications. Again, most small systems don't even know that they're in Dominion-occupied territory. War almost passes them right over, at least this time round. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to major systems like Cetacean Prime. Now, there was a occupation force, though it was light as possible. And that really brings us to the subject of Dominion occupation and what that was like. It's worth remembering that the Dominion is still very much looking for the Federation to surrender and to gain allies in the Alpha Quadrant. So, being tyrannical or carrying out war crimes against the civilian populace isn't really a good idea, and the Dominion know this. So the Dominion are very much on their best behaviour in these captured worlds, and very much trying to put on a good front, and we see this also with how Vortar Wayoon presents himself to the people of Bajor. The Dominion really want to present themselves as just another version of the Federation, a more evolved version of the Federation, but just a little bit more robust and just as magnanimous. So life for most civilians wouldn't change much, and the Dominion was really looking at this point to govern with the lightest possible hand. Now, if they did require force, they would oftentimes, where they could, actually have the Cardassians carry out reprisals. And again, this was because the Cardassians, they already had that reputation of brutality, so the Dominion used them to their advantage as something like their leashed hounds. But the Dominion themselves made a very conscious effort to keep their hands clean and appear as these very generous and magnanimous victors. In any case, the goal of Dominion occupation, it's more of a show, it's more of a presentation of saying, look at who we are, and look at what we bring. We're not really that bad. As they're fighting a war that is killing now hundreds of thousands. And that was the month, with the Dominion advancing towards new strategic objectives, the Federation falling back in panic and disorder, and the Klingons are beginning to mobilize. And that brings us to the end of the Dominion War for February of 2374.